Doctor Who will soon be returning to our screens, with Jodie Whittaker taking over as the 13th Doctor. The casting of a female Doctor is probably the single biggest thing to happen to the show since the first regeneration, way back in 1966. So, what better time to look back at each of the Doctor's eras so far? Join me for the trip of a lifetime as I recap the very best of each era, revealing some of my favourite Doctor episodes and moments along the way. Every actor to have played the Doctor has to leave the show eventually. It's the one thing you can be sure of when you sign up for the role. The majority of Doctors have chosen when to leave in advance, so their regeneration story can be written into the narrative of Doctor Who. However, 6th Doctor actor Colin Baker wasn't afforded this luxury. Instead, he was suddenly dropped from the show with no explanation. The 6th Doctor's era was a rocky time for Doctor Who. It saw the show go on hiatus for the first time, off air for 18 months, and was the first era to end prematurely. Critics and BBC bosses felt the show had lost its way, criticising storylines for being too violent, and Baker's 6th Doctor for not being accessible enough for viewers. Whilst to a certain extent I can understand these arguments, I also think there's a lot to enjoy in the 6th Doctor's short-lived run. There's no denying that Colin Baker's costume was outlandish, but that was beyond his control. His actual performance as the Doctor isn't bad at all. Baker channels the alien quality present in previous incarnations, whilst being much more bombastic and unpredictable. Yes, it's a departure from what viewers were used to, but I don't mind this. I like how the 6th Doctor is more radically different to previous Doctors. It makes him more interesting to watch. It's up to you to decide whether the writers misjudged certain aspects of his personality, but all credit to the team for trying something new. Elsewhere in this era, new storytelling approaches were tried and tested, to varying degrees of success. Both 6th Doctor seasons are structured differently to previous seasons. Every story in season 22 was either a 2 or 3-parter, with each part being 45 minutes long. Though at the time this experiment wasn't deemed a success, interestingly it's much closer to what we've seen in the new series. Season 23 was cut down to be much shorter than previous seasons, so the decision was made to give us an overarching story arc, again similar to what we've seen in the revived era. Life imitated art, with the 6th Doctor put on trial. Although the Doctor escaped, Colin Baker did not, ultimately deciding not to return for a brief regeneration scene the following season after being dropped from the show. He has returned to record audio adventures for Big Finish though in the years since. I've listened to a handful of the 6th Doctor's audio stories, with the early main range story Davros a particular highlight, as well of course as the 6th Doctor's proper swan-song story, The Last Adventure, a more than fitting end for this incarnation. So even though the 6th Doctor didn't have the easiest time on TV, he has lived on in audio. Plus, there are some pretty good stories in his 2 televised seasons, against all odds. Here are some of my favourites. Attack of the Cybermen, the show's first attempt at showing the horrors of cyber conversion. An excellent Cybermen story that sees the monsters roaming around the sewers of London again, as well as the return of their secondary home planet, Telos. The Two Doctors, the story that sees Patrick Troughton's final appearance in the show, with the 2nd Doctor returning once more. It's one of my favourite multi-Doctor stories, because there's no anniversary baggage attached, it's just a fun reunion between 2 Doctors, and the 2nd and 6th Doctors work together perfectly. Revelation of the Daleks, a terrifically dark Dalek Davros story, full of hilarious black comedy and some gruesome imagery. It's significant for being the first story to feature 2 factions of Daleks, an idea that's developed further in remembrance of the Daleks. The Trial of a Time Lord. The overarching story of the Doctor's trial makes Doctor Who's 23rd season a memorable one. It allows for different types of story to be told, with each instalment providing evidence for or against the Doctor's case. Of the 4, my favourite is probably Mind Warp. It has an intriguing central premise, and a rather unusual, unnerving ending for a Doctor Who story. For my favourite 6th Doctor moment, I've picked the speech given by the Doctor to the Time Lord court at the end of the trial of the Time Lord. It follows the revelation that the whole of the Doctor's trial has been a farce, orchestrated by the Time Lords for their own ends. The Doctor's speech draws parallels between the Time Lords and some of his most feared enemies, describing his own corrupt people as in the nursery compared to the Daleks, Sontarans and Cybermen. It's one of this Doctor's most heroic moments, and also one that harks back to the reasons why he left Gallifrey all those years ago. What do you love about the 6th Doctor's era? Post your thoughts in the comments below, and be sure to join me next week as I look back at the 7th Doctor's era.